welcome to another Sales Hacker webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to be diving into sales development. So it's all about sales development today. And what we're going to look at is, is it a revenue generator or has it become, a cost center? It can be a huge investment to kick up a large-scale sales development team. So we're going to talk today if it's still the best move, and do you keep it in-house or do you outsource? And how do you protect scale and, most importantly, prove out that ROI on your investment? So I've got some awesome guests with me today, but before I introduce them, super quick housekeeping items. So number one, first and foremost, we love these to be super engaging. So jump on the Q&A, introduce yourself, tell us your title, what company you're with, and join us. Ask questions throughout. This is always for the community, so get engaged. Number two, we will be recording this webinar. So if you have to jump off, you got a meeting to go to, or you want to share it out with a colleague, we've got your back. We'll be shooting it over as soon as we wrap up today. All right, got that out of the way. Now to introduce my two guests. I'm joined by Chris Laird, SDR manager over at Outreach, and Kevin Warner, the co-founder and CEO of Leadium. Chris, Kevin, welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Scott.
We're pumped and very lucky to have you both. Excited to dive into this one. It's something that's near and dear to my heart. I was a BD manager in a past life, so excited to jump into it. And as always, I do like to add a little more kind of career context just for the community. So let's start with you, Chris. So we were chatting before this, and you've actually had 18 successful years as a public educator, and then you shifted your career focus to sales, and you joined Outreach as an SDR during its scrappy startup days in February of 2016. So you're an OG over there at Outreach, and
yes.
within 10 months, you stepped into a manager role, leading a team of SDRs, in the Pennsylvania office. And today you're actually a senior sales development manager, and you oversee a remote team of senior SDRs who have been with Outreach for nearly 2 years as well. And in addition to all those duties, you also work in tandem with the sales leadership, marketing, operations, success, and product teams, so you can apply the knowledge that you have of the Outreach platform. You must have seen it really grow and transform over the years, and shape the goal of the company. So I think that's really cool. And I had to throw in this fact as well, because we were talking before this. Chris actually played the baritone in a band in front of President Clinton, which I thought was super cool. So had to throw that in there. But welcome, man.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Awesome. And Kevin Warner. So Kevin is the co-founder and CEO of Leadium, the industry leader in outbound sales. And you're focused on connecting a talented global workforce to small businesses, startups, and Fortune 500 companies who are looking to accelerate their growth. You founded Leadium in 2017, and you bring more than 10 years of experience in both sales and customer success. And prior to Leadium, Kevin held several sales strategy, product marketing, and customer success positions in leading enterprise companies and startups. Love it. Welcome again, Kevin. And I know you've had like a big launch of your website or something right now, so thank you for sharing your time. I know it's probably a crazy time for you right now.
No, happy to be here. Happy to be here with Outreach more than anything.
Love it. All right, so as we dive into it, this is going to be a Q&A style, so we're going to keep this casual, dive in. We've got some really good questions to get through, and what we're really hoping that you're going to learn and take away from this is, one, how to really analyze your sales development function, as an acquisition channel, measure success. Number two, the pros and cons of housing your sales development team, in-house versus outsourcing. There's a kind of a big debate going on. And then, third and finally, speaking of debates, why cold calling may or may not be dead. So we are going to tackle the age-old question that always gets people really fired up. Yeah, let's dive right into it. So first off, I want to do a quick shout out to our community. We've got Christian Bacassa joining us, who is the VP of Sales Development over at HireVue. So shout out to HireVue. Thanks for joining us. Okay, let's go. I'm going to go, Chris, first question is for you. So there's a lot of discussion around where the sales development function should even sit. You know, is it sales? Is it marketing? Is it its complete other beast that reports straight to the CEO? What are your philosophies around sales development as a channel of acquisition?
That's a great question. I think, sales development to me is exactly just that. It's the development of your sales, your revenue. For us at Outreach, you mentioned that, I joined the team early on as an SDR, and that was back in the day before we even had a marketing department up and running. So, for us, the SDR team at that time was the marketing engine as well that really helped Outreach grow through that startup phase. So I think a sales development team is the perfect opportunity to blend your marketing investment and our marketing efforts with a high-powered, activity-driven human engine that grabs those marketing-generated leads and combines that with a value-driven action from your XDRs, however you call them, that are helping to generate qualified opportunities and lead to predictable revenue growth for your company. I think historically the big argument between sales and marketing is, marketing leaders just, never really had visibility into what sales reps were doing with their leads. And so, having a tool like Outreach, a platform like Outreach in place, ensures marketers have that valuable insight into how effectively the reps are using the content and how they're treating those leads as they move through the pipeline. So it's a great place to bring together both of those efforts from sales and marketing.
Mm-hmm. Makes total sense. It should be the revenue team going at this and approaching it. I don't necessarily you have to pick a side, but if you had to, who would you get them to roll up to, Chris? Would it be a sales leader or a marketing leader?
For us, we have it set up that our sales development team reports up to the revenue leader, so the sales side of the business. But our marketing team is very integrated into that. So I think it really is dependent on how you have your other parts of your company structured. Mm-hmm. I think if I had to pick one side or the other, I would say go up that sales leadership revenue line, and utilize that knowledge of the direction you're going for and your forecasting to drive that engine.
Yeah, makes sense. And Kevin, would love to get your opinion on this as well. Where do you see the sales development function sitting in an organization?
Yeah, to me, it's that perfect combination of both. Without good marketing, your outbound sales is kind of going to be stagnant. If it were to go up pipeline, I think it's that human interaction that kind of drives sales, that drives outbound sales especially. And that human interaction is really fundamentally best known by the sales team. Those are people who are constantly talking to your customers, your new customers. What are the pain points? What are the problems you're solving for them? I think they just approach that conversation from a human interaction side a little bit different than the marketing team. That's not to say they can't be without each other, but upstream, I think it sits in the sales side, but it's only as effective as your marketing. I kind of boil it down a little bit more though, and before you get so high level with the conversation, which often happens in sales and marketing, it really comes down to who are you as a business. We deal with a lot of SMBs where they would tell you we don't have a marketing team. We hardly have a website. And it becomes the question, does it sit on marketing? Does it sit on sales? How effective can outbound be if you don't have a really good website? I tend to think a lot of people from outbound sales go to your website before you kind of convert. And so you have to look at the business itself. Not everybody is an Outreach or a Sales Hacker or a Microsoft. And so that's what we spend the most time with customers actually walking through is how do we determine what the goal is of the channel itself? And how do we start kind of developing it out from there?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a super, super interesting point, and I couldn't really agree more. I think it is unique to each business. I've actually, been an individual contributor where I reported up to sales, and it was great because you had the coaching aspect. You had, a lot more training. You could naturally pick it up when you're reporting to, the sales leadership versus I've also been a BD manager at marketing. And some of the pros there were, alignment got really, really strong between sales and marketing. And marketing loved it because they could piggyback on some of the knowledge that we were acquiring by being on the front lines and tweak the message accordingly. So I definitely think there's pros and cons to both, and you'd have to do a deep dive and find like you said, Kevin, what's the goal? What's the aim?
I mean, it also comes down to what does that marriage look like? Are your BDR team, is your SDR team qualifying inbound leads? Well, that kind of sits largely in the marketing space versus prospecting net new opportunities, which would be largely in the sales space. So you have to break out and kind of segment out the roles even further from there.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. And then, okay, so just to follow up on that, so we've, what specifically then, when we're deciding or like taking that off the table, what specifically should we be looking at when analyzing the performance of your sales development team? And Chris, let's start with you.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, it goes back to like when you ask that final question, like if you had to choose a side, like revenue, sales leader, or marketing, like the way we have it structured at Outreach, our sales development KPIs are based around like an end in mind approach. So we look at, what does the sales development team have to provide in an outbound prospecting, hunting, way to feed our AEs? How many sales accepted and qualified leads are we expecting each SDR to generate each month for our AEs? And then we work backwards from there. So we understand, what our average hold and conversion rates are on those meetings. And then we, from there, determine, how many meetings each rep needs to set per day, per week. And then that trickles down to the front of the pipeline, which is how many prospects in your accounts do you have to put into sequence, start reaching out to every day to have a consistent, steady pipeline of activity that's going to lead to those qualified meetings. And then, where marketing comes into that is, the marketing generated leads that an SDR might get at Outreach is kind of like sprinkles on the icing on top of the cake. Like we don't want our SDRs to count on, 10 marketing leads coming in. We want them to just be like those added nuggets that come in throughout the month to help supplement what they're already doing in an outbound approach. And then, just working together with the marketing team, like Kevin said, to really hone in on, the messaging that we're all using together and how we can all work together to boost both sides of that coin to make sure that we're driving towards that ultimate goal for the company.
Yeah, makes sense. And do you have that, just to make this super actionable, do you have that number in front of you, Chris? How many have you found at Outreach that how many organizations do your SDRs, BDRs have to be going after at any given time in order for them to hit their number?
So it varies the number of accounts an SDR might work, but we have a pretty standard number of accounts across the SDR team. If you're a fully ramped SDR, you're sitting on about 350 accounts. And the goal, the number one KPI we look at is sequencing 40 net new prospects a day. And if you do that consistently, you're going to have a pipeline of those meeting generating activities that's going to help you get the number of meetings you need for the month and the number of qualified leads for our AE team.
Perfect. That's super helpful. And Kevin, I'm going to go to you actually from a question from our community actually. And it's anonymous, so I'm not sure who they are, but it's what is more common? BDRs that are given, X number of accounts per quarter to work themselves, or BDRs that are continually just given, hundreds of contacts to just work? And what's your opinion on the way to go?
Great question. And I'll give it a little context. My co-founder and I, Sergey, we've helped over the last 3 years, we've worked with about 500 businesses setting up outbound SDR teams, both on the lead generation and sales side. So we bring that context into it. It all depends on the organization you're dealing with. So if we have outreach as a client, it becomes less accounts, more prospects, more personalization, more involvement. And the reason being is because the sale and the positioning is a little different. There's a marketing arm behind it. Your conversion rate should be exponentially larger. The problem is most SMBs, I'll put myself in that category as well, we don't have a marketing arm. We don't even have a marketing hire. So it becomes a little bit more to hit revenue goals and to hit growth goals. You burn a little bit more of your addressable market, but your addressable market changes so much on a given quarter or quarters that it probably more common that we deal with is you're provided more leads. The trick is, and where we come into play and kind of that outsourced solution is, what's the strategy? What's your focus? If you're reaching out to more people, are you measuring the open rates and the conversions? Are you A/B testing? Because the goal of every organization should be reach out to less people and establish more opportunities from less outbound. And you can't always start it that way, but you have to set up your channel, which is where a service like Outreach, a sales automation platform that does so much measuring and analytics, and that's where kind of the conversation leads to building a channel. You're not just reaching out to set up opportunities. You're really trying to analyze the channel itself. So more common we see is reaching out to more prospects. The trick is not to do it without purpose.
Yeah, great points. I like that. So if you've got some green space ahead of you, maybe not a very mature market, it's okay to take the contact approach and lots of leads and lots of volume. Whereas where you get more mature as an organization, it's more about creating those efficiencies so you can make less phone calls, book more meetings, and get to it.
And the idea isn't just seeing it, especially in certain markets, as an outbound method, but setting up proper tracking to know that you're driving site traffic as well, and how good is your funnel on site to turn those leads potentially into inbound. So while you might not be setting up SQLs, it's actually being converted as MQLs. So even though you're reaching out to a little more people, depending on the market and the company, you actually could be driving marketing qualified leads just the same as sales qualified leads. And again, that's that bridging the gap between MQL and SQL. So it all boils down to kind of a foundational strategy and approach, and not just launching emails because they're so easy to sequence these days, but actually having a reason why. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. And we've got we've got lots of questions. So this is awesome. Thanks for the engagement from the community. And Matt Schuster is calling us out a little bit and saying that get into the meat and potatoes of how and why an in-house team could be more productive than purchasing demand externally. So that took me right to my next question, Matt. So thank you. And all right, so Chris, we're going to go with you. So Outreach has a large in-house sales development team, a very successful model. While Leadium, is really the epitome of an outsourcing SDR teams. So what, in your opinion, are the pros and the cons of each? And how should someone who is building an SDR team decide which option is right for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I've never, in full disclosure, I've never worked with an outsourced SDR team. We did use an outsourced SDR team for a short period of time when Outreach was in its fast-growing stage, and we really wanted to churn through a lot of accounts to really try to just get some groundswell going. But I think the biggest advantage of having an in-house team is that you have a team of XDRs that have a vested interest in the growth and success of your company and your core values, and they understand your product and the services that you provide to your customer base at a level that you can get, I'm sure you can get an outsourced team to get to that same level, but it may not be with the same kind of invested interest that like your own in-house team could and should be working with. The idea too is that, you know, you're combining that vested interest with a really clear way of communicating the vision and having people in great leadership positions to instill that commitment and drive that willingness to win. You know, that across the XDR team is what really helps a team really dig in and fight when you might have a period of growth that things slow down or they're a little bit tougher during the time of the year. You know, when I think of like a disadvantage or maybe more of a challenge when you're building like working with an outsourced team, is if you are in that point in your development where you're not sure which one you want to go with, like I think a challenge with having an in-house team is the amount of resources it takes to get that team up and running. You know, it's a tremendous amount of time to train them and get them, you know, working in the process that you've built for them to work within. But it's also a time, you know, it's a money commitment too. It's a financial resources commitment in bringing in talent, you know, taking a chance on bringing in the right talent. Some of them aren't going to work, so you're going to have some churn, you know, ramp time. You know, if you're bringing in inexperienced reps or reps with, you know, just a few months or years experience, you know, you might have a little bit longer ramp time as opposed to working with an outsourced team that already has ramped up reps that are ready to rock and roll. So, you know, that's when it comes down to like where you are in making a decision of which way to go. I think you have to kind of step back and look at where you are with the development of your company, the development of your team and your process and where your goals are, and decide, you know, what's going to be best for the resources you have available, and also what's going to be best for your overall goals of the company and being able to accomplish those goals as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. Made a lot of good points there. And I'll just add one or build off one for a pro to having an in-house team is, Chris, I'm sure you found this with kind of the camaraderie that's built. You know, sales development, business development can be a taxing, difficult job. And when you're kind of in the trenches together day in, day out, you naturally see this like healthy competition. Everyone has each other's backs. That's another one I'd add for kind of the pro.
Absolutely. That's a great point, Scott. Yeah. And, you know, especially within the last 9 months, my team's been working remote. So, you know, going from working in an office where we had that daily interaction, daily camaraderie to working remote, it's, you know, we've worked really hard to build a structure of being able to still stay in contact through Zoom, through daily huddles, you know, through Slack, making sure that we're there to support each other and help each other get through those times.
Absolutely. And Kevin, you've been sitting patiently over there. I would love to get your way in on this and kind of the flip side to that.
Yeah, I might be a little biased, but I say every company in the world should have some outsourced SDR component to it. And what makes us different here at Leadium is we're not saying replace something. We're saying there's a reason and a time for everything. A large company who can afford that investment, that time and money investment, that's not to say that there's a large value for having an outsourced component as well. One is you have turnover. Whether you don't want to believe it or not, there is employee turnover. With outbound sales, theoretically, the belief is that turnover could affect your pipeline in a quarter or in 2 quarters because it's going to take some impact to it. If you have 4 SDRs leave you tomorrow because they want to start a startup, that's going to impact your pipeline in a quarter or 2. There is a value at a larger organization to have kind of a standby or an on-team outsourced component that's never going to leave. Easy to scale up and down. Kind of secondary to your in-house team and more supportive. But it boils down really to the organization itself. Every SMB should not invest in an in-house SDR team until you know what you're doing, right? It's not just as easy as hiring an SDR and they will set appointments for you. You need to hire the brains behind SDR. And we'll get, I'm sure, into sales automation platforms and how they're driving the role a little bit. But how are you using these tools? It's a major expense just on the hiring side to hire an expensive SDR, an SDR manager. But let's not stop there. You then have to add on the tools. Platforms are not inexpensive. They don't come without large contracts. What about the data? Who are you reaching out to? Again, if you're using databases, are you just using one? We can have a whole webinar about data, which database is good or bad. Should you be using a single database, or should you be using an accumulation of every database? Well, you can't do that, because then you have to pay for memberships on every database. Coming to an outsourced company, we don't just outsource SDR. At our heart, we're a research company, and we're a data research company. Leadium has over 130 data researchers just pulling the data to power the outbound services. How are we able to do that very cost effectively? Well, we can spread the cost out for all of these tools and platforms over 200 clients. So the impact and the cost for an individual client is very minimal. And again, if you're talking about the Microsofts and the Slacks of the world, it's a very different ballgame than if you're talking about the small business, the startup that's just trying to get funding. We're on this call because sales development works, right? SDR as a role, as an acquisition channel, it works. It's expensive, and outsourcing kind of provides that cost and kind of strategy component. Now, we also take a little bit different approach, and we position ourselves heavily on not appointment set. And I think that's the fear with the outsourcing kind of industry, is it's pay for performance. Pay for an appointment. How many appointments are you driving? If you hear us on sales calls and with our clients, we don't even talk about appointments, about SQLs, because for us, that's a byproduct of the strategy, of the partnership, of understanding your customer and you as a company and the pain points and how you're solving them. If we understand all of this and we set up outbound in the proper way, appointments and SQLs are just a byproduct of the entire channel. And that's how we approach it. So that real-time communication, that Slack, we took 10 of our SDRs to meet one of our clients in Belgium after they were with us for a year. So you really do get that buy-in to kind of the culture fit as well. And at our root, and why we created Leadium, and I know a lot of other companies do, is we have over 150 employees in Ukraine and Serbia, and you're getting this San Francisco, New York caliber person just at a fraction of the cost. So it's not a matter of you're losing quality or it's a hiring issue. It's just a matter of geography. If they were located in San Francisco, then you would be paying San Francisco costs. These are college graduated people. And just because we leave the borders of the United States or large European countries doesn't mean talent stops. Really in every industry, from engineering on down, and that's true in sales as well. Yeah. So I know I touched on a few, and I'm sure we'll keep hammering a bit of them.
Yeah, no, that was awesome. And Kevin, I love the way that you look at it. It's not one or the other. And it's interesting. Sales is one of these professions where it's like people think it needs to be like in-house or out. But if you look at, how many teams have offshore development teams? A lot. How many marketing teams will outsource creative to an agency? Almost every single one. So it's interesting that the way you look at it, and I would agree. I think it's complementary, not necessarily one.
How many companies are bringing in consultants to even help them with their pipeline or understand their addressable market? At our root, we're a consultancy. We have been doing outbound sales for 5 years. We've been using outreach for 3 years. We know the outreach platform, better than or just the same as the outreach team. And that's how we're positioning ourselves, with kind of this industry-leading knowledge that we're bringing to you just as a fraction of the cost and grouped into a full program to be able to execute, instead of just getting the sales development lead or manager or et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of a different holistic approach that at least we take. Now, it's not what the entire market takes, and that's what, if you are analyzing outsourced SDRs, you have to be watching for. If you get on a phone and anybody just talks about appointments, or you're asking appointment questions and they're over-promising, that's who you should be wary of. But there are great outsourced companies who are taking kind of that employee company-centric approach to building individual kind of pods for each client.
Makes sense. Makes sense. All right. So let's shift gears a little bit. I love that discussion. But let's talk about automation, machine learning. They get thrown around like everyone's talking about it, right? And it becomes somewhat ambiguous to a point. So Chris, let's start with you. What's your take on how automation or machine learning is influencing and changing the sales and business development function?
Yeah, it's kind of two questions there. Like I'll first start with automation, because I even saw one of the questions popped up about how do you address customization and personalization within an email? Like, when do you know that it's the right time? Depending on how your automation is set up, automation can take care of some of that for you with the use of some custom variables, being able to pull fields in from other data tools or other integrations that you have within your stack, and being able to put that into a series of touch points that act as like an automated bump. It's running in the background while your reps are really hyper-focused on the types of activities that are going to lead to the revenue. The manual touch points, the personalized conversations, being able to have more phone calls, more value-driven conversations. So automation, that's one of the things that I love to show people in the outreach platform, is when you can look at a rep's performance each week and then toggle over to the email view and see how many emails outreach is sending on behalf of that rep, that the rep doesn't even have to press send in their inbox. It's a great way of showing that power of automation working in the background to give each rep on the team more coverage across their accounts and their prospects, but done in a way that it's tasteful and tactful. It's not like overloading. When you take it one step further and you start talking about machine learning, now you're really getting into, if you've been following our new outreach series, like the Mythbuster Mondays, which I love to watch those.
It's awesome.
One of the things that kind of slapped me in the face on the first one was that, we as sales leaders, we make a lot of gut-driven decisions. And we think, we hear that it works for somebody else, so we try it, and we see a slight uplift in our performance or our results, so we think that that's the new wave. But the machine learning is a great way of looking at things like that and seeing what's the data behind that. What's the data saying? And that's what the Mythbusters is really kind of just ripping the Band-Aid off that and taking a look at that. So machine learning is changing the way we can eliminate human bias in some of these tests that we're running, and test theories that are in a more effective way in order to utilize the learnings and the key takeaways from those tests in a way that are going to drive more results. One way we use it at its most simplest is through A/B testing. We can, with our machine learning, we can look at A/B testing and which subject line or which template's getting more opens, more clicks, more replies. But then you can do it across like little tiny tests across such a large swath of touch points. You can even take it one step further. Like, we're looking into how do emojis used in a subject line or in a template affect the open rates? How does the inclusion of video in templates and emails have an effect on it? And being able to see that across your organization can really help you make changes really fast that are going to increase the results that you would see in a month, in a quarter, in a year. So it's really great to have machine learning working in the background. Even looking at how somebody replies, the type of language that you see in a reply, even if it's a negative reply, the type of language that somebody uses, being able to have the machine scan that and then propose to the SDR, hey, based on the language that they sent in this reply, follow up with this email. You might get a response. You might be able to turn that negative into a positive, even if it's not, a meeting right off the bat. It's going to be a future relationship that you're going to nurture through a reply that the machine is helping you to test out in the background. Another thing is at a very high level, when machine learning gets executing, you can even be looking at it as a cost saving effect across your team and your organization. If you're really cruising along with machine learning and automation, you could be looking at that as a way of, saving revenue by not having as many headcount on your team, being able to see the number of results that you need to drive the business forward and continue to innovate without having to hire a whole bunch of people to do all that stuff that a machine can help you do efficiently and effectively.
And I agree with Ton there. And Kevin, I'm going to get to you in a second. I just have a quick follow-up question for you, Chris. This is from the community. Christian Bacasa, again, from HireVue. I think it's a really good question. How are you managing when it is time to go, fully customized and personalized messaging versus, automation and letting the automation do its thing? Is it upon engagement that you get? What are the indicators?
Yeah, I think there's a couple indicators, a couple key indicators that would be used in that decision-making process. One of which is, how long an SDR might have been working in accounts. If they started out with a commercial size account and they needed to work their way through, qualify it, kind of understand the chain of command, and then narrow down their focus on like the key decision makers in that company or on the team that they're going to reach out to, then you bring in all that research that you might have been able to collect through an automated process, like automated sequences that are getting some replies, getting some qualifying information. And then you put all that in front of the SDR and you allow them to take a customized approach when they reach out to that key decision maker, being able to leverage that research, being able to leverage that data that they've collected along the way to be able to get that meeting or get that appointment with that person or even a conversation. Another key factor that we look at is, it is engagement. If I'm able to see in outreach that, somebody that I have in sequence is engaging with my emails, they've opened their emails, they've maybe clicked on some of the links. Maybe I've even had a conversation with them, but I caught them, in between meetings and really didn't have a chance to get too far down the value-driven conversation. I can follow up with a very customized follow-up sequence, not just a one-off email, but be able to follow up with that custom email and put that into a reply follow-up sequence that is going to make sure that I continue to stay in touch with that person until the timing's right, or until I catch them at a time that we can carve out 15 minutes to have a more lengthy conversation about what it is, the challenges that they're facing and how we can help them solve that. So those are probably the two biggest factors that we use in determining when it's time to move away from a more automated sequence to a more customized, personalized approach.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And thank you for the question, Christian. All right, Kevin, over to you with automation, machine learning. How is this influencing and changing the SDR function?
Yeah, automation, machine learning, really the reason I love those two things, it's inherently changing the SDR role as the market knows it today. And if the role itself does not keep up with the automation and the machine learning, companies like ourselves are only going to become more and more relevant because it's about managing very cost effectively the machines that are so, great at handling the pipeline and conversions and automating who gets what message and what's effective and what's not. And a lot of today's SDR world, and we interact with a lot of SDRs, it's about prospecting, it's about sequencing, it's about sending emails, writing a template, placing a phone call. However, the reason we're able to be as successful as we are is because of the power of outreach. That's how we can kind of offset a lot of costs. It's because the SDR role has a lot of manual jobs involved in it. Those manual jobs are getting taken off of the table one after another from a product like outreach, right? As soon as you come out with the ability to click a button and a no-show follow-up email is automatically sent within a sequence that will try to rebook a meeting, my need to continue to follow up with that prospect has now been removed. What am I doing with that time now? So for us, the market, as the SDRs are known today, have got to keep up with the automation. And it's becoming more strategic. Not as much prospecting, but more about who are we prospecting to? Why? What's the messaging? What's the customizations? When's too much customization versus not enough customization? How do you analyze the data? These are no longer roles for what used to be an SDR manager. These are now becoming more and more the roles of the SDR. So the sad part is a lot of organizations are not keeping up with that. But that's really the crux of the entire marketplace as you have outreach. Outreach is so young, right? What are they going to do in the next 1 year, let alone 2 years? And how is that offsetting the SDR role and really the power users of the platform? Well, they've got to keep up as well. The machine learning, I always like to say machine learning is still very much in its infancy. It's easy to see open rates differences, and is that call to action working? Is this one not working? We're getting better and better as automatically detecting responses, and how should that be handled? Is that a positive or a negative? But really when machine learning needs to keep up is analyzing what's working for a given market. I'll break it down a little bit. And all these blog posts from like HubSpot about, hey, these are the top 10 subject lines, or hey, these are the top 5 ways you should write a call to action. The problem is it's polluting the marketplace. We get on with company after company who's saying, hey, you guys at Leadium, why are you using that subject line? That's not right. And we would say, hey, across 50 clients, it's getting a 70% open rate. Do you not want us to test this for you? No, but I read a HubSpot article that says something different. Yeah, but what you're not taking into context is the strategy. And that's the fact that, well, who was the addressable market they were reaching out to? What was the product they were selling? If Slack sends an outbound email, it's going to get an open rate because you're sending it with a marketing machine behind you. It's not a pharmaceutical company that's 5 employees that no one's ever heard of. And what are you guys selling versus what the other person's selling? Are you selling to a C-level or a manager? And kind of compiling all of this data is really the next place for machine kind of learning. And if I'm uploading prospects into Outreach, if I'm uploading accounts, if I'm uploading anything, how does it automatically determine what's best for that user? How do you take the human element out of that still, which needs to be there, and how do you automate it? So that if I'm uploading for industry or persona type, that it's already going to display what we've been doing for the last year and what would be best practice, what would be the best sequences. And it's not there yet. The machine learning side, which I say things like open rates and call to actions and conversion rates, that's all good, but that's been around for a while. It's now how do you make that catch up to the automation that's really happening in the place. But to boil it down a little, it's changing the SDR market. If SDRs in the US don't keep up, that's where outsourced solutions are going to get more and more leeway because it's a very cost-effective method of managing very strategically all of these automation platforms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Kevin, you see the SDR function moving away from, smiling, dialing, sending a million emails to more of a technology quarterback, you could call it, and managing those processes and how you use the technology. Is that where you're going to see it going?
That's exactly right. There's still going to be some percentage of your day that's going to be involved in what still is manual tasks, whether that's LinkedIn or manual steps, whether that's LinkedIn, whether that's a phone call, whether that's a phone call off of 4 opens. But it's all kind of leveraging the technology that's out there. And those tasks are starting to become less and less time consuming because it's much more automated. And it's alerting you, and say Outreach is automatically creating tasks on triggers. So all you need to do is sit there in the beginning of the day. And so it's kind of how do you backfill that with the time component. And that's going to be focused on setting up the strategy, setting up the machines, setting up the outbound platforms, and managing them in the most effective way possible. Otherwise, that time component, that expensive time component of in-house SDRs is going to completely flip. And that's, hey, you're not driving those conversions. The machine is driving those conversions. Your function in that machine is not worth X amount of cost, salary, hiring, benefits, whatever it might be, because the machine is doing the bulk of the work. So it's either what's that next type of outbound sale? What's that not email, not phone call, not LinkedIn? Is it back to physical mail? Is it sending postcards again? Does that drive up conversion? So there's some component I see right now on the market that's, well, what's next if all of these tasks are becoming so automated?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that's a good kind of segue into our next question, which is, still in the realm of machine learning and automation. But there's obviously a lot of conversation in the broader sales community around whether or not cold calling is dead. There's always marketers to blame with all their clickbait and stuff. But how have you seen cold calling change with this shift to automation? And Chris, let's hear your take on that.
Yeah, this is a debate that obviously intrigues me. Actually kind of entertains me to read some of the stuff that's out there about this.
Likewise.
I've kind of narrowed it down to three schools of thought here. Like, people that weigh in on this debate, there's a certain school of people that say cold calling is dead. And I personally believe that they come from maybe a history of unsuccessful cold calling, and they're afraid to get on the phone and engage with people. Maybe it's, just that fear from being hung up on or, denied so many times, which is understandable. The second one is like sales leaders that have really high expectations for what a rep should come into a cold call with, in their ammunition. Like they want them to know every single aspect about their company, their role, their career, their sales process, their pain points before they've even had an opportunity to talk to someone at the account, so that makes it really hard for a rep to kind of break through that and get a rapport going with somebody where they can learn that. And then, and I think that's where it takes you to the third one, which is like, it's kind of an argument over the definition of what is a cold call. For me, a cold call is I'm calling you. I have no information about you, your company, what you sell, what you do. And I'm just cold reaching out to you. Like I picked the phone number out of the phone book. I think with being able to set up mindful sequences where you're sending out, emails that are personalized or automated and they have a little bit of personalization built into them, you're starting to lay that groundwork for, being able to follow that up with a phone conversation and gather that information. So that third school of thought is maybe the sales leaders that feel like their reps aren't equipped with the knowledge to be able to go into that cold call and make it warm. And that's what's really important. And, Kevin really hit the nail on the head there. Like, and I think somebody even put this in the Q&A, like, reps can become really reliant on automation and tools that in their stack to make them lazy or almost stop thinking. And, it's really important that sales development reps are reminded that they're hired because of the skill set that they bring, the creativity, the level of thinking, the innovation that they have, that they combine with these tools to make them work effectively for them.
Mm-hmm.
So how I've seen cold calling change is, first of all, automation working in the background has enabled, our internal SDRs to be more time efficient throughout the day, by, queuing up those mundane actions that you don't really want to be paying a rep to do, like creating tasks or creating task lists or bulk creating tasks, updating data in their CRM, or even sending those simple bump emails to keep priority top of mind. It allows reps to then invest more of their time gathering that information from the tools that are automating some of those processes and coming up with an idea of how they're going to leverage that within their messaging, whether it's sending out that first personalized email, whether it's, maybe following up on something on LinkedIn, commenting on a post, sending out a connection request that has value behind it, or more importantly, getting on the phones and having those conversations and, and just having the the knowledge right there and right in front of you, so that when you do get that connect, you can quickly transfer that conversation into a value-driven, meaningful way to communicate with a potential prospect and hopefully future customer. If you look at the results that our SDRs are getting at outreach, like over 65% of the meetings we set come from phone calls. Like that can't be a sign that cold calling is dead. I think it's a sign that calling is being used in a very effective and efficient way, utilizing research and automation all combined together to help reps be more successful when they do go in and sit down and pick up the phone and start calling out and wanting to talk with their prospects.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what I kind of pulled from that is, automate the mundane tasks, and it's going to allow you to have more time actually to personalize when you get to the high value activities like that actual call with the, decision maker.
Yeah, and not only personalize it, but also it's going to give your reps more time to train and be ready for those conversations. Mm-hmm. I know role playing is kind of, like a swear word sometimes in SDR shops, but it really is. I think of it like a playbook. Like if you're an NFL team, you go out on the field, you know what plays you're going to run. They're going to be your most successful to drive the ball down the field. But, taking it 10 plays deep and saying, okay, if I get through the first play, what do we do next? What do we do next? So allowing reps to really, play through the playbook. And when I get on the phone, how am I going to move this conversation forward into a value-driven conversation, not just how am I going to overcome an objection in order to keep this person on the phone long enough for me to get my pitch out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes total sense. And Kevin, over to you. And just a quick point before I give you the stage. So we've got a ton of questions. So we might have to do a follow-up webinar to this one. We've had so many questions. So we'll have a little bit of time at the end here to try and bang through as many as we can. But Kevin, would love to get your opinion. Just how has machine learning automation, how has it changed the game for cold calling?
Yeah, it's a very simple answer, and that's cold calling is not dead. It's just cold calling is not for everybody. And I don't mean everybody as in every SDR. I mean, it is not for every company, right? It's a little biased when you can say, hey, 65% of our leads came from cold calling. You have a large marketing machine behind you as well, right? And if you look at the entire marketplace, which is how I analyze questions like this, it's not for the 5%, it's for the 50% of mom and pops or SMBs or growing companies like myself. And is it effective? Is it not? And that's where the question, I think, aligns with what we started the conversation with, and that's who are you as a business and what are you trying to accomplish? The fact is, from my experiences, cold calling is not one of the most effective outbound channels for a lot of growing businesses where revenue and the expense that they need to put towards this channel is not readily available. There are other activities that can drive the pipeline to revenue and hit your next 2-quarter goals versus kind of the outbound phone calling. And why I say it's not dead is because any ROI positive return on investment acquisition channel, whether that's pay-per-click, whether that's SEO, whatever it is, if it's driving your business revenue, it is not dead. If cold calling is not driving you revenue, you're making more money than it's costing you to perform that task, then it might be dead for your company, or you might not have done it efficiently. You're going to have to retest it. But if it's driving revenue, it can't be dead. So the question in itself is kind of outlandish, right? Because it's driving revenue. We just heard from Outreach say, hey, it's driving us a shit ton of revenue. We know that it's similar for a lot of other businesses. And there's a lot of great partners who can help scale that. Again, it's all about that effectiveness and things like Connect and Sell and how do you plug into that outreach or automation platform along with Outreach. That again increases the cost, etc. But it all boils down to who are you as a business? Who's your addressable market? Are you going after restaurant owners or are you going after sales teams, right? I would beg to argue that Outreach is targeting salespeople. Salespeople are probably more receptive to outbound phone calls because they themselves are doing outbound phone calls. We have a lot of small businesses who target one location restaurant owners. right? Phone calls, you can't get them on a phone call. You can hardly find their email address, let alone get them on a phone call. And so that ROI conversation is kind of the root of the entire question. And that's, if we add on phone calls, it's going to take more time because it takes more time to dial than it does to send emails. We have a very large addressable market. Revenue is kind of a focus for us. We can automate, personalize. We can kind of analyze the conversion metrics. We can see if our SQL set from the outbound is kind of driving growth in the sales numbers. And if we add in the phone call component, how does it add or take away to that investment dollar? And I think that's a question every single business needs to analyze on their own. Obviously, if you have more of a marketing machine behind you and you sit more in the middle of those two, I would probably say, yeah, you'll probably see that return. If you don't have any marketing machine, if you don't even have a big web presence, I would say no, it's probably not going to be the most effective. And that's the great things about Outreach, which I know I keep trying to shove their sponsoring the day, is Outreach allows you to analyze that. And analyze, hey, what is, if this is truly a channel, which is one of the questions of the conversation, how are we measuring the channel and what activities within the channel are actually driving our revenue growth, and how does that change for every single business? So I don't like kind of the statements that a lot of marketing teams throw out there for clickbait almost, because it does brainwash a lot of businesses who it might work for or it might not work for. And there's always that component of just because it's working for you or just because it didn't work for you doesn't mean it's a good decision for another company.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. I find that's almost across the board in business. It's very little times, black and white. It's always, a shade of gray depending on where you stand. All right. So we got about 5 minutes. So I'm going to just rapid fire some questions your way, Chris and Kevin, if you don't mind. And let's try and bang through as many as we can. All right. So, Chris, I'll shoot this one over to you. Adrian Cummings wants to know, it's a question around motivation. So it can be hard to motivate BDR teams. How do you motivate BDRs when they're making 50 calls a day, leaving 40 voicemails, get 5 connections, and maybe they talk to 2 people all day? One, how do you motivate them? And how do they get good when they only have 2 quality conversations a day? And she adds a little caveat: don't say role playing.
Yeah. No, that's a really great question, and it's a very tough subject. So as I meant, like our SDRs make about 75 phone calls a day, and I did that too when I was an SDR with Outreach, and it can be really taxing. And you know that you do have those days where you only speak to 2 people, and a lot of times those 2 people hang up on you, or one of the schools that I really coach and talk a lot about with my reps, and we encourage each other in this area, is incremental gains. Like having a series of touch points that you've structured is allowing you to have those incremental gains that over time are going to allow you to secure that value to lead to that conversation. I can think back to accounts that I worked as an SDR that I worked for the full 10 months I was an SDR, and I had people in those accounts that I had in multiple sequences. But it took that long to really kind of find that one nugget that got my foot in the door to have a valuable conversation. And I think that it almost becomes a game, for SDRs. Like on my team, I see that they're driven by the challenge to really learn as much as they can about their accounts and leverage that knowledge to win in a way that they're able to communicate that value and bring a customer in to take a look at what Outreach can help them do and how it can help their company grow. So I hear a lot on my team. It's a lot of that camaraderie that Kevin spoke about. It's a lot of that team culture of we've got your back. Like, I have guys on my team that will shout out on Slack, like, hey, how's the phones today? I'm getting hung up on, or I haven't had a lot of connects. Hope you guys are, seeing better results. Like, keep at it. We got this. Like, we're all going to get a meeting. And then like cheering each other on when we do have a great conversation, or when we do convert one of those conversations over to a meeting. We know that that's what we're in it to do, and that some days the phones are not hot. Other days they're red hot. And those are the times that you got to be on the phones both days, because that day that you're dropping that voicemail may not be to you very important. It might be the 70th voicemail you dropped that day, but that sales leader or marketing leader may listen to that voicemail and hear something that you said that really resonates with them. And then the next email that's sent out, they open it, they reply, they book a meeting. So, keeping them focused on those little steps that lead to the results.
I'll add in, motivate them by getting them to be creative as well, right? It might not just be a hammering the phone call, but I always say, hey, if I sent a box of donuts and I called you the next day, would you take my call then? I have to assume that, yes, we don't know for your business, Adrian. I don't quite know the market you're in. But if you got 8 out of 10 calls by sending a box of donuts and you closed 5 of those 8, I bet you your CEO, your owner would say, send a box of donuts to our entire addressable market because our user acquisition cost, our customer acquisition cost is $20. Okay, like I'll do that all night. So get creative, challenge them to be creative. The SDR role, and this is what I'm talking about, it has to start becoming more and more strategic. If the solution is kind of doing the same day in and day out and hoping for large dips, that's where the motivation kind of dies, or I can assume dies, for a young SDR who's trying to kind of get those easy wins. But I would say make it a game, and that's what outbound sales is. It's a game, and who's going to win it? Who's going to get the most conversions? And that entire way on the pipeline, you can do so many interactions, right? That's why a company like another outreach partner like Sendoso is becoming bigger and bigger, right? They're making it easier to plug into automation platforms and measure things like boxes of donuts along with phone calls, along with emails. So get them to be creative. That'll motivate, because I think you'll see the increase in metrics.
Absolutely. I agree with so much of what both of you said there. And just adding my 2 cents, kind of spin off of creativity, is empower them to add like business value other than just, booking opportunities. So I know when I was, managing a team of BDRs, I would give them all like a monthly kind of task that would help our overall team or our overall business. Like, hey, look at how we're doing ABM. Do you think we can do it better? Like, are we doing it to the fullest? Or, hey, go look at 3 new technologies that are out there and report back to me. Sure, it might take a little bit of the role away from selling and creating opportunities, but they're going to leave that day feeling like, oh, I contributed. I did something above and beyond just hammering, smiling, and dialing and getting opportunities. All right, so we got a lot here. I think we're gonna have to. Well, we'll call it. It is 12:02, so we're 2 minutes over. As much as I could talk about this all day long, and this has been a great conversation, guys. We'll be cognizant of everyone's time, but thanks you all for sticking around till the very end. Chris, Kevin, thank you for the insights. That was a lot of fun today.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. And thank you, community. We'll look to do a follow-up on this one for sure. Take care, everyone.